Mapping is a hurdle for me. So lately I just don't do it. Hello, I'm Skylar the ADHDM, and today I want to introduce you to the art of mapping without mapping.
You can call it the art of fighting without fighting.
My compulsion to create an endless to-do list before starting a task, because I am terrified of the unknown, means I can accidentally burn myself out on something before starting. With game prep, this is certainly the case. With something as nebulously defined, yet universally required as world building, the bell tolls for me. When I print out some hex paper and start drawing continent shapes and rivers and lost cities, etc., I have a real and perhaps justified feeling that I cannot let my players loose in the world until I know what happens when they pick a direction and go there. I want to protect their
verisimilitude.
But it's not just a question of what is that way, it's what happens when you go that way. Who else is there? What happened before all this? So the fractal spiral of world building spins into infinity, and suddenly I've spent 6 hours prepping the game without prepping anything for the players to actually do. Now, it is possible to take one huge, heroic, valiant effort and divert that compulsion into something more or less usable, and that's called prepping for the West Marches, but that's for another video. You thought this was a short bill hat. It's a long bill hat. So instead of all that, we're using a system called, well, what I'm calling anyway, nodes of travel. Maybe you can come up with a better sounding name, but for right now, we're getting nodey. Until someone programs a travel time calculator with encumbrance and mounts accounting for small versus medium creature pace and reckless versus careful pace, those rules barely belong in 5th edition. Your mileage may vary. But the only time I've seen time tracked meticulously in 5th edition is during combat for spell duration, or when a player asks, "Hey DM, was that long enough for a short rest or long rest?" Very occasionally someone says, is it sunrise or sunset, because their thing refreshes? And the player characters and NPCs certainly don't have thoughts like, yes, 25 miles west of here there is a most strange fountain. But they might say a day away or a ways down the road. Codifying these abstractions into mechanics behind the screen can help us answer the question, what is that way? And what happens when we go that way? And who else is there and what happened there before? We can draw a little circle and say, this is town. Whether it's Orlane, Flan, Valaki, or any other place. We will assume that it's acting as a home base for at least a little while. That is our central node. If we move away to the next node, we have something next to town. You can call it next to, or neighboring, or something that means really close by. That's our first abstraction, and there are a number of things we would want to be less than a day's travel to get there and back. This is a location that is away from the safety of town, but the party doesn't have to spend resources or really risk a lot to get there. For my purposes, there's a very low chance of random encounter or discovery when going somewhere next to town. Something nearby is going to take longer. There might be some road, some wilderness, and some next to nodes along the way. Things that are nearby are going to use up a day of whatever resources you feel like tracking. I like using lifestyle expenses for this. There will be a higher chance of encounters or discoveries, and the party will need to be a little more cautious. After all, the safety of town is further off, but not unreachable. The last type of node that I use, I call remote. To meaningfully represent the passage of time and risk associated with journeying to a remote location, we can say that it takes many adventuring days. How many? That's up to you. So before traveling to a remote location, the party will need to acquire the resources they need to survive on the way. Whatever that means to you in your campaign. Maybe your rangers and select background features can finally scavenge some food. Their chances of encounters and discoveries along the way are significantly higher as they pass by other next to and nearby nodes, but it doesn't have to be constant either. As they pass those nodes, you can either give them familiar cues of places they've visited or heard of, or tantalizing hints of what could be in this unexplored place. Probably don't call it a node to the players. Hey, do you want to go into this node? No, we don't. Not every node has to be a dungeon or an encounter. It can be an abandoned campsite, a wild crop of rare spell components or potion ingredients. It could be an inn. It could be a landmark. Anything can occupy that space. There also doesn't have to be a node there at all. Not every increment along the line from town to remote locations has to be filled out. You get to choose that dramatic pacing. You get to add the nodes where you want. If traveling north to the remote monastery used to be safe, albeit exhausting, but now there are hobgoblin raiders along the path disturbing travelers, that's a node, baby. And when they're dealt with, the node is gone. This might feel like it's only good for linear travel and storytelling. After all, we're talking about points along a line. But while it acts as a very flexible outline for that type of adventure, it also lends itself extraordinarily well to sandbox nonlinear play. It can even create the illusion of hexploration without actual hexes. Don't tell the hexagons I said that. Subscribe to the channel for more hexagons, I swear to you. In fact, if we do use hexagons for our nodes, that will give us plenty of ways to differentiate which direction something is in, relative to the central node. If two nodes are interconnected, really all we have to do is draw a line and decide how far apart they are. If it took a lot of nearbys to get there, it's probably remote. If it took a lot of next tos to get there, it's probably nearby. You can get as vague or as detailed as you want. And at the end of the day, what this means is, yes, technically, we have a map, in a sense of the word, but it's full of blank spaces for us to fill in as we prep the game each week. Instead of a literal representation of every place and piece of terrain and named town in our game world. If these blank spaces were on an actual map with continents and rivers and stuff, not only would it stress me out, but we'd eventually run out of room to add more locations. It would, at some point, be done. It would be committed to a finished state. And in my experience, stuff that's finished is not super great for group storytelling. This kind of unfinished portrait of the world means we can react to our players' desires and playstyle as we all move forward and settle into whatever the campaign will eventually become. And not have to retrofit something that we already spent a ton of time on and then get super frustrated when it doesn't work out the way that we hoped. Thanks for watching.